Welcome to Twilight Fables, where fairy tales rot from the inside out. Tonight's tale is a retelling of the Goose Girl, but in this version, the betrayal goes deeper than lies, down to the very skin. The sky above the castle was a swollen bruise of grey, a heavy dome pressing down on the land, as though the heavens were mourning a death yet to come. No birds dared sing beneath such a sky. The trees shivered with a sullen silence, and the wind moved like a breath held too long, waiting. Inside the east wing of the castle, the princess lay awake, staring at the high canopy of her bed. Her sheets were undisturbed, folded and pressed, as if no one had touched them. The carved roses on the wooden posts seemed to lean closer, their petals curling like ancient fingers reaching in. She thought of her mother, the queen, pale and distant at the window the day before. The queen had pressed a cold silver token into her palm, a circle engraved with an unbroken thread, tangled and twisted, but never broken. Her words had been sparse, clipped. Speak not of what you know. Trust the thread. Obey the signs. Those words felt less like advice and more like a sentence. The princess's heart had hammered like a trapped bird's. She wondered what was hidden behind those words, what darkness she was about to step into. Her handmaiden, Elva, waited silently in the adjoining chamber. Elva was pale, almost translucent beneath the cold light of the morning. Her hair was straw-coloured, her eyes unnervingly dark, like twin shards of obsidian. She had served the princess for years, but there had never been warmth between them, only the rigid bounds of duty and unspoken tensions. When the hour came, the princess rose and dressed in the softest woolen cloak she owned, trading silks and jewels for simplicity. No guards accompanied them for the first leg of the journey, only the princess, her handmaiden, and the slow, creaking carriage. 3 days they travelled through winding forest roads and fog-laden moors. The only sounds were the soft clop of horses' hooves and the rustle of leaves stirred by an unseen wind. On the 4th day, the guards who usually trailed behind vanished as though swallowed by the mist. The princess felt an unspoken unease settle in the pit of her stomach. By the 5th day, the journey had taken them to a clearing surrounded by twisted trees, draped in moss like ancient shrouds. The princess climbed down from the carriage, brushing dried leaves from her skirts, and approached the well at the clearing's centre. It was old and cracked, its stones slick with moss and darkened by time. "Fetch my water," the princess ordered, holding out her empty goblet. Elva's eyes met hers, dark and unblinking, and then she shook her head. "I think not," she said, her voice low and unwavering. The words cracked the silence like a whip. The princess blinked, confusion rippling through her. "What did you say?" Elva smiled then, a slow, cruel smile that didn't reach her eyes. I said, "No, Your Highness." Before the princess could react, Elva flung a pouch to the ground between them. Dust exploded upward like a serpent uncoiling from its cage, a fetid stench clawing at the air. It smelled of iron and wet leather, and something worse, like skinned flesh left to rot in the dark. The princess staggered back, coughing, her vision swimming. Elva whispered words that slithered through the clearing, words in no human tongue. The air bent and folded as if the forest itself was shrinking in on them. Leaves shriveled and curled, trees arched their branches like beasts awakening from long sleep. The princess tried to scream. No sound escaped her lips. Her limbs stiffened, her mouth working uselessly. Elva stepped forward, eyes glowing faintly like smouldering coals. "You always look down on me," she said, voice low and deliberate, "even as a child, but you were only ever skin, walking around with a crown." She unfastened the princess's bodice with a tenderness that mocked her, then lifted her own dress over her head. Beneath it, her skin was marked with red lines and black ink, an ancient spell scrawled in jagged loops and teeth across her torso. "I don't want to be you," Elva whispered. "I want your shape." She pressed her body to the princess's. There was a tearing, not of fabric, but of form. The forest shrieked. The moss withered to dust. Light reversed in the sky, like an eye closing. The princess collapsed, smaller now, thinner. Her voice returned but was raspy and unfamiliar. Elva stood above her, panting, in the princess's skin, and smiling. They arrived at the gates of the new kingdom at dusk. The guards who greeted them did not notice anything amiss. Why would they? The one who spoke was dressed in royal velvet, her golden hair pinned with pearls, her face the image printed on coins. The one who held the reins, walking beside the carriage in servant's garb, was dismissed without thought. When they reached the palace, Elva, now princess, took the royal chambers for herself. The true princess, now wearing Elva's skin, was sent to the lower quarters. Stripped of name and title, the only kindness afforded her was a place in the mews among the geese. And there, amid feathers and filth, the princess sat, trembling in skin that didn't fit, unable to speak her truth without being called mad. The geese had not forgotten. At dawn, they gathered around her in a silent circle. Their black eyes glittered like coal pits. One stepped forward, tilting its head with eerie intelligence. "Not your skin," it hissed, in a voice like a cracked reed. The princess scrambled back, but the goose followed, its webbed feet dragging slowly through the dirt. Wrong meat, wrong shape, wrong smell. Another goose joined, then another. They muttered fragments of words, voices like wind moaning through keyholes. Stolen, bound, buried. Thread. The princess clutched at her arms, Elva's arms, and sobbed. The sob didn't sound right. It had Elva's throat in it. Behind her eyes, something pulsed. Meanwhile, in the palace, Elva, the imposter, sat before a mirror, brushing hair that wasn't hers. She smiled sweetly when the prince entered, kissing his cheek and laughing at his words. But when she looked again into the mirror, the smile faltered. There, behind her reflection, was something watching, something wearing her real face. The princess's journey had only just begun. The road to Altenwald Castle coiled through deepening forest, and each turn of the path felt as though it led not just farther from home, but from reality itself. The trees loomed taller here, their trunks dark and damp with moss, their branches thick with hanging lichen that looked like desiccated fingers brushing the tops of the royal carriage, though summer still clung to the land. In the sun-dappled meadows they had left behind, in this place the air grew cooler, and the light struggled to push through the foliage. The hush of the woods was total, broken only by the creak of wheels and the steady clop of hooves. The princess sat quietly in the carriage, her pale hands folded in her lap, the edge of her blue velvet cloak brushing her knees. Her name had not been spoken aloud since the forest had begun to swallow them, as though it too had been forgotten. She held the kerchief her mother had given her, and it still pulsed faintly with warmth, reminding her of home, of her mother's final whispered words. "Guard your name, child. Guard your blood. Guard your skin." Falada trotted alongside the carriage, calm and watchful. The horse's eyes followed every movement in the shadows, ears twitching in alert attention. And yet the princess noticed something strange. Falada seemed increasingly uneasy around Greta. The maid no longer kept her seat at the back of the carriage. She now rode beside the driver, speaking to him in low tones. Her posture relaxed, too relaxed, the princess thought, for a servant in the presence of royalty. Even more troubling was the way Greta looked at her now, not with respect or deference, but with something darker, hunger almost, a barely hidden disdain that curled at the corners of her mouth. That night they made camp near a ring of standing stones, carved with weather-worn symbols. The driver, old Caspar, built a fire and prepared a simple stew, while the two girls sat on opposite sides of the flames. Falada grazed nearby, but never strayed far from the princess. Greta watched the princess in silence, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You're too soft for a queen," she finally said. The princess looked up from her bowl. "I beg your pardon. You sit like a statue. You barely speak. You don't even give orders. You're not used to being obeyed, are you?" Greta's lips twisted in a smirk. A queen should command the room when she walks in. People should feel it. "I was taught to lead with grace, not force." Greta laughed, a short, cruel bark. "Grace won't get you far in Altenwald. You'll be eaten alive." The princess opened her mouth to respond, but a rustle in the woods silenced her. Falada raised his head sharply, and whinnied low, ears pinned. Caspar stepped into the firelight, looking unsettled. "Best get some rest, Highness," he said, his voice tight. "These woods, they're not quiet tonight." That night, the princess couldn't sleep. Her dreams were feverish, full of strange, slippery images. A girl made of mirrors, a mouth full of feathers, a cloak that crawled across skin like a living thing. She woke before dawn in a cold sweat. Greta was already awake, standing just beyond the fire's edge, her eyes gleaming in the dim morning light. Something was wrong with her silhouette. It rippled somehow, as though the air around her bent. The princess rose and moved to Falada, who stamped anxiously as she approached. She stroked his muzzle, whispering to him, and the horse nickered in reply. The next day, as they neared the outer edge of the Altenwald territory, Greta's behaviour grew bolder. She gave orders to the driver. She corrected the princess's posture. She even insisted on brushing the princess's hair for her, yanking the golden strands harder than necessary. The princess endured it, growing more and more uneasy. She held tightly to the kerchief, whispering to it each night, "My name is mine, my name is mine, my name is mine." But the forest had other plans. That evening they came upon a fork in the road. One path led toward the main road to Altenwald Castle. The other led into an overgrown trail, barely wide enough for the carriage. Caspar hesitated. "That's not the way, miss," he said. Greta leaned down from her seat. "The main road is too dangerous. Bandits stalk that way. We'll take the forest path." Her Highness agrees. The princess leaned forward. "We do not. Caspar, take the main road." But the driver only looked to Greta, his brows drawn. Greta's voice shifted then, low and velvety. "Take the forest road." Caspar blinked slowly, as if surfacing from a dream, and tugged the reins to the right. The carriage wheels jolted over roots and uneven earth as they descended into a deeper, darker part of the woods. Here the light failed entirely, and even the horses grew restless. By nightfall they reached a clearing bordered by stones, covered in moss, with a stagnant pool at its centre. Greta announced that they would camp here. "You should bathe," she said to the princess. "Make yourself presentable for the prince." The princess frowned. "I'll do no such thing." But Greta was already removing her gloves. "Do you want to look like a wildling when you arrive? Take off your cloak. I'll help." Falada whinnied loudly and moved between them, his flank brushing the princess as if to shield her. Greta smiled. Falada, always so loyal. Then, before the princess could react, Greta threw something into the horse's eyes, a fine black powder. Falada screamed, rearing back and thrashing. The driver cried out and fled into the woods, his torch flying from his hand. The princess screamed, reaching for Falada, but Greta was already moving. She shoved the princess hard, and the girl stumbled backward into the pool. The water was ice. Her breath was stolen. She surfaced gasping, the slime of the pond clinging to her skin. Greta stood at the water's edge, untying her bodice. This was always going to happen, she said calmly. I was never going to be your maid. What are you talking about? The princess choked. I've worn your skin before, Greta whispered. Long ago, and now I'll wear it again. She stepped into the pool. The water began to boil. The princess tried to flee, but her limbs felt slow, numb. A force was dragging her down, wrapping around her wrists and ankles like vines. Greta moved toward her, her own skin beginning to slough off in strips, revealing something slick and pulsing beneath. Her voice echoed in two tones, one human, one ancient. Give me your name. Give me your blood. Give me your skin. The princess screamed, but the forest swallowed the sound. The wind off the mountain had grown sharper, dragging whispers through the trees like torn silk. Falada's skull, nailed above the gate to the lower stables, had begun to gather moss where the bone met wood, as if the earth were trying to reclaim what man had denied it. Every morning, the skull's hollow sockets watched the false princess ride out with Conrad to tend the geese, and every evening they stared into the twilight as the real princess, Gisela, shuffled past in peasant rags, her hands raw from scrubbing stone. But the stable wasn't the only place that remembered. The hallways whispered when the false one, now called Ilsa, passed the tapestries that lined the cold stone corridors of the palace. The threads seemed to ripple, the weavings writhing at the corners. The woven eyes of queens passed, glanced sideways as if in disapproval. On more than one occasion, Ilsa paused mid-stride, caught by the flicker of movement at the edge of vision. A hand that had not been there the moment before, a fluttering hem where there was no draught. She ignored it, of course. She always ignored it, but her stolen skin didn't. In the goose fields, Gisela's hands bled through her gloves. The chill of the grass never truly left her bones, and the geese were no gentler in the cold. They hissed and bit, pecking with ugly beaks. She no longer wept when they drew blurred. It was the silence she couldn't bear. Even Conrad had grown quiet. He had once chattered incessantly about palace gossip, about which goose was the fattest, about the odd dreams he had, but lately he only watched her, warily, as if he saw something coiling beneath her skin. She felt it too, at night, when she lay curled in her straw bed behind the stables. Her dreams were full of mirrors. Her own face looked back at her with hollow eyes. Sometimes it was her old face, princess skin, smooth and aglow. But sometimes it was Ilsa's face, and the skin was sagging, rotting, peeling off in flakes to reveal her own beneath. She always woke screaming, and always, just before the scream tore free, she saw a sewing needle in the mirror's reflection, threading her skin back on like a badly tailored dress. In the palace, Ilsa was beginning to come apart. The Queen, Gisella's mother, was planning a great banquet, one that would announce her daughter's engagement to Prince Theon. And though Ilsa wore the princess's face, her skin was rebelling. It was subtle at first. Her right hand would twitch violently when the Queen embraced her. A ripple would pass over her cheek when the prince kissed it. Her voice cracked when she lied, and sometimes she tasted copper when she spoke Gisella's name. Worse, her memories weren't holding. She struggled to recall court etiquette, or even what her childhood had supposedly been like. Once, when asked about the summer retreat, she had described the wrong lake. The Queen hadn't noticed, but Prince Theon had tilted his head just slightly, his smile flickering at the corners. Ilsa chalked it up to nerves, but that night the skin bled. She found the seam behind her ear, where she had stitched herself into the princess's face, and it was red, angry. Pus wept from it when she pressed too hard. She bandaged it, muttering old lullabies to herself, trying to calm the sensation of her blood boiling beneath the skin. The turning point came with a dream. Both girls had the same dream on the same night, though they would not know it until later. In the dream, a girl with no face walked the palace halls. She wore a gown of crow feathers and stitched together mouths, and in her hand was a looking glass smeared with ash. Wherever she walked, the portraits turned to face the wall, the floors wept blood, and the candles snuffed themselves out. She stopped before each of them, Ilsa in the royal bed, Gisela in her straw pile, and held out the mirror. They each looked, they each screamed. In the days that followed, the air around them grew thicker, as if the kingdom itself was suffocating under a lie. Milk curdled in the kitchens. Children in the village were born with milky white eyes. A horse was found dead in the forest, its skin flayed in the pattern of a crown. Conrad began to speak again, but not to Gisela. He whispered to the geese. He told them the girl was wrong, that her eyes moved too slowly, that her shadow sometimes had too many limbs. He didn't think she could hear him, but she could, and worse, the geese began listening. One of them, black-feathered and old, bit her so hard it drew a strip of flesh. When she kicked it, it only stared. Its eyes were human, for just a breath of a second. In the palace, Ilsa found her mouth sewn shut in a dream. She tried to scream, but only threads pulled tighter, stitching her tongue to her teeth. She woke with blood on her pillow and an ache in her jaw. She unwrapped the bandage behind her ear. The seam was gone. In its place was her own flesh, old, dull, mottled with birthmarks that didn't belong to Gisela. Her own skin was returning, and it was dragging the rest with it. When she looked in the mirror, one of her eyes had gone grey-blue again. The other remained hazel. She slammed her fists into the glass, sobbing. The shards cut her face, and when they fell, the blood on them was thick, black, and steaming. Then came the storm. It was not natural. Lightning struck the same tree in the courtyard 7 times. Rain fell upward. The sky turned the colour of old parchment and stayed that way for 2 days. Animals screamed as if skinned, and in the middle of it all, a figure walked out of the woods. She wore a goose feather cloak and a veil of hair. Her feet bled with every step, and her hands were raw. Gisela, but not the broken, weeping girl who had watched her friend take her life. This Gisela had let go of grief. She had made space for rage. She entered the courtyard, dripping with rain, her gloves soaked crimson from the thorns she had picked along the path. She looked up at the castle, at the towers and the windows full of false light, and she whispered a name, Falada. The skulls screamed. The rain rolled in with a low groan, a sound like the belly of the earth turning over in its sleep. It had been 3 weeks since Lotta took the skin meant for Princess Adela, and yet she still hadn't quite grown comfortable inside it. The seams of the new identity pulled at odd angles. Her voice still cracked sometimes when she laughed. The muscles of her face, not quite sure which expression to wear. Every morning she would sit before the silver mirror in the palace guest chamber, pulling her cheeks and tilting her head until the shape staring back looked more like what she imagined a princess ought to be. "You mustn't furrow your brow," Lady Galinda would chide. "Royalty never frets." Lotta would nod with the obedience of someone desperate to pass for something she wasn't, though inside her nerves coiled and hissed like snakes. Her every move was watched now. Maids polished her slippers, servants adjusted her gowns, tutors drilled her in courtly history, etiquette, and the royal bloodlines of neighbouring realms. She learned which fork to use, how to walk without letting her arms swing, how to lie with a smile on her face. But the worst of it wasn't the lessons, it was the way the skin fought back. Some nights she'd wake choking, her body seizing with cold sweat as the air in her lungs turned to pins. Her skin would tighten like a shroud, and the mirror would reflect not a princess, but the rough-boned kitchen girl she used to be, just for a moment, just long enough to remind her. She began to fear mirrors. The real Adela wandered the goose meadows, in the same body she'd always worn, only now it hung on her like a borrowed coat, soaked in sorrow. Her once soft hands were raw from tending the honking beasts. The cold wind off the hills turned her cheeks a permanent flush, and her hair, once braided with pearls, was now tangled with straw. But her spirit did not fray. She watched Lotta parade through the palace gardens in her stolen skin, smiling and waving with choreographed grace. Adela stayed low, speaking only when spoken to, pretending to be the mute girl called Griselda, who'd come with the geese after the fire. The shepherd boy, Conrad, was the only one who paid her much mind. He was simple in thought, but quick with suspicion. He'd begun asking too many questions, watching her movements too closely. "You speak when no one's around," he said one morning, as they let the geese out of their pen. "You say names in your sleep." She shook her head, wide-eyed and silent, but he wasn't fooled. That day, as they crossed the footbridge over the glade, Conrad ran ahead and turned, blocking her path. "Say something now. Prove you ain't a ghost." Adela said nothing. Conrad narrowed his eyes, then snatched the kerchief from her head, revealing her long dishevelled hair too golden and fine for a common goose girl. "Thought so," he muttered, then darted away. That night, Adela slipped from the sleeping quarters and made her way to the old well in the forest glade. It was the same one she and her handmaid had passed on the way to the palace before Lot had betrayed her. The stone mouth of the well was overgrown with ivy and moss, but the water beneath still glimmered darkly. She knelt beside it, fingers trembling over the edge. "Wind, blow gently on my face. Take this prayer where it must go." She spoke not aloud, but inwardly, through her teeth, through her breath, through the hollow ache in her chest. "I was born of royal blood, but stripped of name and skin. If any spirits guard these woods, let them see me now and witness the lie that walks in my stead. The water in the well did not ripple. No ghost rose from its depths, but the air shifted around her ever so slightly. In the palace, Lotta was preparing for her engagement ball. Prince Lucas, the noble from the western realm, had been enchanted by Adela's beauty. During his visit, she had learned to dance. She had learned to flatter. She had learned to make herself soft in the eyes and charming with her words. But she had not learned to live with the guilt. Each time the prince smiled at her, she felt a burning on her back, just between the shoulder blades, where Adela's mole used to be. It was still there, a permanent mark. She tried to scrape it once with a knife. The wound refused to heal. Her dreams were worse. She'd see Adela standing in the garden with blood running down her face, asking, "Why are you wearing my skin?" And Lotta could never answer. The animals had begun to act strangely around her. The palace hounds would growl when she entered the room. A bird once landed on her windowsill and instead of singing, just stared at her with black eyes before flying into the glass hard enough to break its neck. Even her horse, a lovely white stallion named Damar, refused to be mounted by her now. "You've changed, my lady," said the stable master one day. "He knows your scent no longer." "I've always been the same," Lotta snapped. But it wasn't true. That night, she lit every candle in her chamber and sat before the silver mirror again. She pressed a finger to her cheek, pulled at her lower lid, studied her jawline. "It's mine now," she whispered. "It's me. I'm her." The mirror said nothing, but in its corner, something moved, a dark flicker at the edge of the reflection. When she turned, the room was empty. Conrad was not the only one who'd grown suspicious. Lady Galinda, loyal to the royal family since her youth, had served Adela's mother and knew the princess well, while Lotta mimicked the gestures and voice with growing precision. She could not mimic the soul. "There is no glimmer behind your eyes," Gerlinda whispered one morning while adjusting the train of her gown. "You wear her like a costume." Lotta froze. "What did you say?" The old woman leaned closer. "You heard me, and I've spoken with the king." Lotta's blood turned to slush. "You... what?" "I told him there may be imposters among us. He will watch. He will decide." Lotta stood quickly. "You shouldn't have done that." But Gerlinda only smiled. "Neither should you." Later that day, the king summoned the court to the great hall. Adela, still disguised as Griselle the Goose Girl, was ushered in with the livestock staff to help serve drinks. She moved quietly between the guards, holding her tray of silver goblets, eyes low but not blind. She saw Lotta on the throne dais, wrapped in silk, a jewelled circlet resting on her stolen brow, and she saw the king watching both of them. At the height of the ceremony, he stood and raised a hand. "Let there be quiet in the hall," he called. "I wish to ask a question of the Goose Girl. Yes, that one. Bring her forward." The room tensed. Conrad gasped. Lotta went pale. Adela stepped forward, trembling, but did not drop the tray. The king studied her for a long time before speaking. "You tend our flocks with loyalty," he said, "but you have not spoken a word since arriving." Adela lowered her eyes. The king gestured. "Take this girl to the chamberlain. Have her washed, dressed, and brought to my private court tonight." Lotta rose, voice strained. "Your Majesty, what is the meaning of this?"
The king didn't answer her.
His gaze remained locked on the Goose Girl, who bore his daughter's eyes. The night air was thick with rain, the kind that clung to the skin and made every breath feel heavy and damp. The palace, once a place of light and laughter, now seemed cloaked in shadow, as if the very stones mourned the deception sewn into its heart. Adela sat in the chamberlain's quarters, her fingers trembling as she traced the edge of the simple dress laid out before her. Gone were the ragged goose-feathered cloaks and dirt-stained boots. Tonight she would dress as a princess again, or at least as the world thought a princess should dress. Conrad had promised he would be nearby, watching, ready to help if she needed it, but even his presence couldn't still the pounding of her heart. The door opened quietly and Lady Gerlinda stepped in, her expression unreadable. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. Adela nodded. "I will be with you when you meet the king," Lady Gerlinda said. "Remember, speak only what you know to be true." Adela took a deep breath as the door closed behind her. Meanwhile, in the grand hall, Lotta paced nervously near the throne, her hands clenched tightly, the weight of the stolen skin pressed on her like a shroud. Every whisper, every glance from the courtiers felt like a blade. She knew the king's summons was no accident. He suspected, and suspicion in the court was a death sentence. She tried to summon the cold detachment she had learned so carefully, but it slipped through her fingers like smoke. In the royal chambers, Adela was dressed in fine silk and jewels, her hair arranged in a cascade of golden waves that caught the light like spun gold. The reflection in the mirror startled her. It was her face, pale and resolute, framed by the trappings of royalty, but beneath the surface she felt the jagged edge of fear. This was not just a reunion with her father, it was a trial. The chamberlain led her to the great hall, where the king awaited, seated on his throne. The court assembled in hushed anticipation. As she stepped forward, the murmurs rose. The king's eyes held a fierce kindness as he spoke. "Princess Adela, or whomever you may be, stand." Adela stood tall, despite the tremble in her knees. "Do you know why you have been brought here?" "I believe I do, your majesty," she said, voice steady. "Speak plainly." The court fell silent as Adela began to tell her story, the journey, the betrayal by the handmaiden, the switch of skins, the days spent among the geese, the restless nights haunted by shadows. Her voice wavered at times, but the truth shone clear. When she finished, the room remained still. Then the king stood. "Lotta," he said, turning to the false princess, "you have deceived us all." Lotta's face paled. "Your majesty, You wear my daughter's skin, but have none of her spirit," the king said, "and the court will see you for what you are." The courtiers whispered, some sneering, others gasping. Adela's heart pounded as she waited. Then the king raised his hand. "Guards, seize the imposter." Lotta's eyes widened in terror as 2 armoured guards stepped forward. But before they could move, the doors to the hall slammed open. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. It was the true Adela, cloaked not in silk, but in feathers. Her gaze was fierce, unyielding. She stepped forward, voice ringing through the hall. "I am no imposter." The chamber erupted. 2 Adelas stood face to face, the one in silk, the one in feathers. The king's eyes flicked between them, searching for truth. "Speak, child," he said to the feathered figure. Adela removed her cloak, revealing the worn but proud face of the girl who had borne the cruelty of betrayal. "I have lived in the skin of a servant, but my blood is still royal," she said. "The skin does not make the person." The hall fell silent. The prince approached cautiously. "Then which of you is the true princess?" he asked. The answer lay in their eyes, the one with the fire of justice and the one with the poison of deceit. The court decided that the true test was yet to come. Both girls would stand trial by the ancient rite of the mirror, a magical mirror set to reveal the soul beneath the skin. Adela and Lotta would look into it, and the truth would be known. The night before the trial, Adela sat alone in the garden, the moonlight casting silver on the leaves. Conrad joined her. "Do you fear what the mirror will show?" he asked. Adela shook her head. I only fear that the world won't see the truth, even when it's clear. Conrad smiled softly. Sometimes truth is a skin you have to wear, not just a thing you speak. The chamber housing the ancient mirror was the deepest room in the castle's forgotten wing, a place long sealed from light and memory. Its walls were carved with runes of protection and revelation, and the air was thick with the scent of old incense and secrets. Adela stood before the great mirror, its surface shimmering like liquid glass. The court had gathered in hushed silence, their eyes fixed on the two girls who would unveil the truth. Lotta stood to her side, eyes narrowed, the skin she wore tight and fragile, like a second skin too large to fit properly. Her hands trembled, betraying her bravado. A hush fell as the king raised his voice. Let the trial begin. Adela took a steady breath and stepped forward. The mirror rippled, and as her gaze met its surface, her reflection blurred and twisted, revealing glimpses beneath the borrowed flesh. The image flickered, her true face, radiant and fierce, then the mask of the handmaiden, and then the skin she now wore. The crowd gasped. Lotta followed, her steps uncertain. When she looked into the mirror, it darkened, shadows crawling across the surface. Her image fragmented, cracks spidered through her face, revealing not the princess, but a twisted, monstrous thing beneath. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the stone walls. The king's voice cut through the silence. The mirror has spoken. Guards moved forward. Lotta was seized, struggling, but the strength in her limbs was waning. Let her be cast out, the king declared. Her crime is one of the deepest kind, the theft of skin and soul. Adela watched as the false princess was led away, the weight of the stolen skin falling from her shoulders. But the trial did not end there. That night, as the castle slept beneath a veil of stars, Adela sat alone by the well in the courtyard. The water glimmered darkly, reflecting the moon's cold light. Falada approached silently, his white coat shimmering. He lowered his head, nuzzling her hand. I am sorry, she whispered, for what has been stolen, and for what must be reclaimed. The horse whinnied softly. A sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow slipping between the trees. She stood, heart racing. From the darkness emerged Conrad, breathless. They're planning to move you at dawn, he said urgently. To the eastern border, where the king's enemies watch. You won't be safe there. Adela's mind raced. She could not run, not yet, but she could fight. Plans were made in whispered meetings beneath the flicker of candlelight. Lady Gerlinda, loyal and fierce, pledged her aid. Conrad vowed to watch the borders. A handful of servants, those whose hearts beat true, prepared to stand with her. The castle, once a place of deception, became a fortress of whispered hope. Adela trained with the castle's master-at-arms, learning to wield a blade with precision. Her fingers, once soft from courtly life, grew calloused, her muscles ached, but her resolve hardened. Each morning she rose before the sun, greeting Falada and riding hard across the hills, the wind tearing at her cloak. The kingdom was changing. One dawn, as mist rolled over the fields, Adela received a visitor. It was the king. His face was grave, his eyes searching. "My daughter," he said softly, "you have endured much, but the danger is far from over." Adela bowed her head. "What do you wish of me, father?" He hesitated, then said, "There is a prophecy that a ruler must prove their worth, not by birth alone, but by the strength of their spirit. You will journey to the northern wilds, where few have dared to tread, to seek the counsel of the seer of the frost." Adela's heart quickened. "The northern wilds," she repeated. "The seer is said to possess the sight, to unravel curses and reveal true kin. You must seek her, for your skin is not the only thing stolen." Adela nodded. She knew what she must do. The journey was perilous. Snow began to fall before she reached the edge of the known lands, the trees bowing under the weight of ice. Nights were bitterly cold, and the stars seemed distant and cold as well. She rode with Falada, her faithful companion, and Conrad, who had insisted on coming despite the danger. Days passed in frozen silence, the wind biting like a living thing. One evening, as they set camp near a frozen lake, the surface cracked with a sharp, echoing sound. Adela stared down into the icy depths, seeing reflections that were not hers, faces twisted by rage and sorrow. She reached into the water. The ice bit her fingers. A voice whispered from beneath the surface. "Skin is skin," it said, "but soul is deeper still." Adela shivered. The night deepened. At last they reached the seer's hut, nestled between frost-covered pines. The seer was a woman with eyes like polished stone, her hair a cascade of silver. She welcomed them without surprise. "You carry a heavy burden," she said. Adela told her the story. The betrayal, the stolen skin, the false princess. The seer nodded slowly. "There is magic old and dark in your tale," she said, "but the truth is not only in skin or blood. The soul's mark cannot be taken." She pressed a cold hand to Adela's forehead. Visions filled her mind, a tapestry of shadows and light, of bloodlines intertwined with curses and redemption. "You must find the thread," the seer said, "a binding thread that holds the stolen skin to its wearer. Cut it and reclaim what is yours." Adela's breath caught. "How do I find it?" The seer smiled faintly. "In the place where the forest meets the sky, where the first stitch was made." Adela understood. Her journey was far from over. The sky was bruised purple and black as Adela, Conrad and Falada rode through the dense forest that stretched like a living maze toward the horizon. where the treetops seemed to claw at the clouds. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, but beneath it lay something fouler, an undercurrent of rot and old magic, tangled like roots beneath their feet. Adela's thoughts were a swirl of the seer's cryptic words, the binding thread, the first stitch, the place where the forest meets the sky. What did it all mean? She stared up at the canopy, searching for a sign, but only shadows answered. The deeper they travelled, the heavier the silence grew. No bird song, no rustling leaves. Even Falada's hooves fell softly on the moss-covered ground. Conrad, ever watchful, clutched his knife tightly. "We're not alone," he muttered. Before they could react, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. A figure burst from the shadows. A man, garbed in tattered black, his eyes wild and burning with a fierce light. "Turn back," he shouted. "You do not know what you seek." Adela's grip tightened on the reins. "I seek what was stolen from me." The man's gaze flickered to Falada, and a sneer twisted his lips. "The binding thread is no mere stitch. It is a curse woven by those who bind skin to soul. A curse older than your kingdom." He lunged forward, but Falada reared, knocking the man back. Conrad stepped forward, blade flashing in the dim light. "You will not stop her," Conrad said firmly. The man retreated into the darkness, leaving behind a chill that clung to their bones. As night fell, the trio set camp beside a clearing where the stars spilled across the sky like shattered glass. Adela sat by the fire, her mind restless. She unwrapped the silver token her mother had pressed into her palm, the one she had carried since leaving the palace. It glimmered faintly in the firelight. Could this be the key, the thread? Conrad watched silently, then spoke. "That token, it bears the royal seal, but it also carries a stitch, an enchantment woven into the metal." Adela's heart quickened. Then it must be the binding thread. At dawn, they continued their journey, the token warm in her hand. The forest began to thin, giving way to steep cliffs that dropped away into swirling mists. The sky stretched wide and empty above, as if the world itself held its breath. Here, at the edge of the world, they found a narrow path carved into the stone. At the path's end stood a solitary tree, gnarled and ancient, its bark cracked like dried skin. Adela approached, the token pulsing in her palm. She reached out and touched the tree. The bark was cold and rough, but beneath it she felt a vibration, a hum of magic. With a whispered prayer, she pressed the token into a deep crevice in the trunk. The tree shuddered, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. A thread of silver light unfurled from the token, weaving itself into the bark, then stretching into the sky, where it dissolved into the clouds. Adela gasped. "This is it, the binding thread." Suddenly, the wind howled, whipping leaves and dust into a frenzy. From the swirling mists, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked in shadows, with eyes like molten gold. "You seek to unravel the stitch that holds fate," the figure said, voice like the rustling of dead leaves. Adela stepped forward. "I seek to reclaim what was stolen." The figure laughed, a sound like breaking branches. "Then you must be willing to pay the price." With a swift motion, the figure reached out, and Adela felt a sharp prick at her wrist. Pain flared, sharp and searing. She looked down to see a thread, thin as a spider's silk, weaving itself from her skin into the tree. "The binding is mutual," the figure said. "Cut the thread, and you may lose more than you gain." Adela's breath caught, but she nodded. "I am ready." With trembling hands, she grasped a small dagger Conrad had given her. She traced the thread with the blade, heart pounding, and then sliced. The silver thread snapped, unraveling like a spool of light. A shockwave rippled through the forest, and Adela staggered, vision blurring. When her sight cleared, she saw the figure had vanished. In its place was a mirror, a simple, hand-held glass, lying on the moss. Adela picked it up. Her reflection shimmered and changed. Gone was the false skin. Instead, her true face shone back, strong, radiant, and unbroken. Returning to the palace, Adela was met with gasps and tears. The court could no longer deny the truth. The skin was merely a shell, but the soul inside was hers alone. The king embraced his daughter, his eyes wet with relief. Lotta was gone, exiled to the darkest reaches beyond the kingdom. Adela reclaimed her place, not just in title, but in spirit. And as dawn broke over the hills, the geese took flight, their wings beating the air in a symphony of freedom. The morning sun spilled gold across the palace grounds, catching the dew on the grass and lighting up the banners that fluttered weakly in the cool breeze. The kingdom held its breath, watching the final chapter unfold. The shadow of the past lingered, but the promise of a new dawn stretched before them all. Adela stood on the balcony, her fingers curling around the carved wooden railing. The weight of the stolen years pressed against her chest like an iron band, but the fire in her eyes was brighter than ever. The skin she wore now was truly hers, mended and whole, stitched with threads of truth and resilience. Below, the geese gathered in the courtyard. Their eyes, bright and knowing, followed her gaze, as if they understood the journey she had endured. The king approached quietly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "My daughter," he said, voice thick with emotion, "you have returned not only as princess, but as the rightful soul of this kingdom." Adela smiled, though the memory of betrayal stung. "I could not have come back without those who stood by me." Conrad stepped forward from the shadows, his eyes meeting hers with quiet loyalty. "And we will stand with you always." The queen, who had watched the entire trial and journey in silence, approached with a heavy sigh. "Forgiveness is a long road, but you have shown the kingdom what it means to be true. In the great hall, the council gathered to make amends. Laws were rewritten to protect the innocent from deceit and sorcery. The kingdom's magic was acknowledged, not feared, with rituals restored to ensure balance and justice. Adela took her place as ruler, not with arrogance, but with humility. She walked among her people, learning their stories, their fears, their hopes. The skin she bore was a symbol, not of power, but of survival. One evening, as the castle lights dimmed and the stars shone bright, Adela returned to the old well in the forest glade. It was here, beneath the twisted branches and ancient stones, that the last threads of her past had been untied. She knelt, dipping her hands into the cool water. The reflection staring back was no longer fractured or false. "Thank you," she whispered to the night. From the shadows, a soft rustle signalled a presence. Falada stepped forward, his coat gleaming in the moonlight. He bowed his head. Adela smiled softly, but the story was not yet done, for in the deepest shadows of the castle, where light dared not wander, a faint stirring began. A whisper, a thread, the echo of a stolen skin, yearning to be whole again. And so the kingdom held its breath, knowing that every skin worn carries a story, and every story a shadow that waits to be faced.